thank you for being here. I can't see you. I'd love to know who you are, but how could that be possible? We'll see. Let me just do a little something here. Yeah. I got the spelling right. It's lovely being applauded for just doodling like that. Thank you. Yeah, this little person is moving away from happiness, as you can see, and quite happily so, which is a strange paradox, but it does touch on something rather lightly that which we know about. Sometimes I think that word happiness, if it wasn't there, we might be happier, and this moving towards it all the time is part of the problem in some ways. Now, I don't wish to trivialise this matter. I've got nothing to contribute to the science of happiness. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a researcher. I'm someone who's, lived a bit of my life, and so I'm here to just offer what I have found to be true at this point about happiness. And for better or for worse, I'll try and wander through that like that person who's, following this little duck, actually. I once created this idea of this direction-finding duck who always points to new joys. And this person is not concerned about the idea of happiness. This person is concerned with the duck and the joy therein. Now, that's to make light of a big subject, and this is a big space, and I am a little bit of the view that happiness has become too big as a word. And I think it's also a very small thing. I think it's us who've become too big sometimes, and I think part of happiness is shrinking ourselves back to a natural level where happiness is there for us. And we can appreciate what we have at our feet and all around us and in nature. So that's my position, and I'm not sure there's much value in that, but I offer it. And then there's this idea that happiness is a personal thing. And yes, it is also a cultural thing, and how difficult it is to find happiness or be happy in a culture, in a society that might be very unhappy, that suffers chronically from despair, and all the health aspect of happiness has probably been outlined a bit so far. And so I do recognise it's not just a light matter of ducks and flowers and perhaps, a lovely romantic moon or another bird or something up here. It's not just about that. So, there we are. That's so much like life, isn't it? So, what have I found to be true, or appears to be true? Well, I'm talking rather slowly, and I have this idea that nothing can be loved at speed. And I think love, we've heard talk about love. I think we're caught up in a great cycle of speed, and I think it's so hard to be natural at the velocity at which we're now asked to move. And that bothers me enough. Nothing can be loved at speed. I think that is pretty true. The other idea is happiness enough. Not a high-quality happiness, but just happiness enough, I think, is something I hold to. And that also, real happiness does not look like happiness. That's probably a Taoist sort of idea. Real happiness does not necessarily look happy, and I'll make a little drawing because I'm happy when I'm drawing. I'm happier drawing than when I'm talking. So what would be a very, what would we say, a stereotypical happiness on a face? This is somehow meant to represent humankind. I don't know how a human could ever have a nose so large. And there would be this happy fool, that sort of lovely, holy fool. It could be female if I like, maybe just those simple graphic things. But anyway, that looks like a depiction of happiness in a simple cartoony form, but it's so fragile because all I have to do is just go like that. And suddenly it's not happy, it's rather malign and malicious and rather wicked looking. And so that's how the cartoonist works, with little things. And in working with those little things, one sees that life and happiness and unhappiness turn on small points. And so there's this idea of love, that we should love each other and be happy. Love each other and you will be happy. It's as simple and as difficult as that. And in saying that, I'm not talking about the love between people necessarily. I'm talking about the love between the person and their work, the person and their garden, the person and their world, all the forms of love, that if only we could engage it and take it seriously, I think this brings us into our real self, that we're not living a lie anymore, that we are being authentic if we engage in what we love and what we care for and what we are kind towards. So it's not just in the mind, it's not just in the mind that where happiness lives. I think it is sort of in the hands, and it's in the feet, and it's in the entire body. I also made a little poem once. I'll get rid of that person. I'll send them away because I don't like the way they're looking at things. What was that poem? I'll try and remember. About the big toe. My big toe is a happy man. So down to earth and normal. Sorry, I have now forgotten my poem. It'll come back to me. My big toe is a happy man, so down to earth and normal. Always true unto himself and pleasantly informal. Full of simple energy, contented with his role. If more of me could be like him, I'd be a happy soul. So there has this lovely, simple capacity to enjoy that which we touch, the feet that walk, that we connect in this way to reality. I find is terribly important, and it leads me to the idea that a connection to nature is so essential also, and to the beauty of nature. The modern urban life offers scant beauty, I think, in this form. And I think we suffer from the loss of beauty in this way. Or the beauty of picking up a handful of soil and letting it fall through our fingers, or getting ourselves dirty. The wabi-sabi happiness, if you like, that impermanent, incomplete. And what is the other one? I don't know. It's that sense of it, just happiness enough, the slightly battered happiness, and learning to know that that is the richness. There's a little story I have, which may be a metaphor for happiness. It occurred to me the other night while thinking about this. I had a terrible experience as a child. It was a near-death experience, I realised in retrospect. At about the age of 9, I think, I was taken fishing in a boat by my father and 4 of his friends. These fellows are all working, labouring sort of fellows, and they were having this beautiful day off. And they were looking forward to it with great happiness. I knew that. We arrived down at the bay here. It was an overcast day, didn't look too good. None of them knew anything about boating. It was back in the days when life vests were not compulsory. But they bought a few bottles of beer, I noticed. And they were so brimming with sort of expectation and joy that they didn't have to work, didn't have to be at home. They were going fishing. So here's this innocent boy who's me taken along. I'm sat in this boat, an old boat, and off we head, and they're beaming. They're all suddenly sailors on the sea, and they're beaming. We got way out, far from land, and lo and behold, a storm blew up, as it does in Port Phillip Bay quite easily. The sky grew dark, the wind came up, the sea grew dark, a horrible colour, and the waves started to rise. It got worse and it got worse. So they decided it was time to head back. But they couldn't start the engine. And there was great consternation. And the boat was tossed this way and that way, and it was appalling. And the sky got blacker and blacker, and the waves were crashing down on the boat. For the first time in my life, I saw a grown man start to blubber and cry, and was beside himself with a kind of hysteria. And then he started praying. I was sitting next to him. He started to pray out loud to himself. And meanwhile, the other men were bailing the boat out in great desperation, and I knew they were terribly worried, and the boat was pitching all over the place and lost. Well, this would have gone on for an hour and a half, and it was an appalling experience for an impressionable young boy. So, eventually, by a miracle, after about an hour and a half, the engine started, and they turned around. We somehow turned around, and we headed for the shore. It took a long time to get back. As we got back, the weather died down. It calmed. And soon the land was in sight, and soon the jetty was in sight. And we were cruising towards the jetty. And suddenly, everybody was incredibly happy again. And I was reflecting the other night, isn't that strange? This passage through a happiness at the start with all that expectation, absolute near-death despair, and then a miracle of some sort, and then sort of happiness and utter joy. Of course, what my father didn't realise, that my mother was waiting on the jetty and was not happy. And his happiness soon turned to shame, and that was the end of that. But not a bad metaphor in some ways, because I think there are passages in life when happiness departs. And I have found in my own work that there's times of disillusionment. You can't get an idea. You panic, you go into a despair. And it's a time when you're down, you're not wanting to make cartoons for the world or anything like that. And And then you set out to make a cartoon, and it all turns into a mess. You have no sense of humour, no happiness, you just feel terrible about your abilities. After all these years, you still haven't learned really how to do it. And so you start to get in this appalling mess. And then you give up, and you stay with the mess, and you stay in the mess, and you start to play in the mess, because everything's lost anyway, it's all ruined. And so you stay with it. And then at that point, you start to create. You start actually to break away from yourself, because your ego is in ruins. All the self-image that you are a fine and funny fellow is in ruins. You realise you're infantile and hopeless. And accepting that is a lovely thing, just for a moment. Of course, anybody looking in on this process would not recognise that I'm falling apart inside. I try to look composed, etc. True panic doesn't look like panic. And so I come out, and then I find the solution in this. I'm starting to make a mess and draw things I don't really understand. And soon I see things in it that I haven't realised, etc., etc. And eventually, any piece of work worth doing seems to be like that in the world of creativity. Having an ambition, losing the ambition, it crumbles. Finding a mess, staying with the mess, finding in the mess of your own ego and what's before you some sort of happiness, if you like, some joy of breaking free. And so there seems to be, in my life, this cycle of if I'm disillusioned, if I'm down, if I'm not happy, I seem to have learned that disillusionment seems to precede creativity, seems to precede some epiphany, if you like, some small moment of epiphany. And I learned not to be afraid of my disillusionment and the loss of self. It's not this grim holding on to self, because you know it's a sort of an inner crucifixion going on, and there will be a redemption and a rising up. Not always, but usually. And so the loss that comes with unhappiness sometimes is clearing the decks, making fallow ground for something also, this total grief and loss. And to stay in that and to create in that is to regenerate in that. And so I think we move through these cycles of loss, grief, mess, regeneration, new things growing, epiphany, joy. So I can't help but see it anything but cyclical. I'm not talking about this mortal despair afflicting some people or some societies. I'm talking about the ordinary, that so-called ordinary cycle. I'm looking at a clock in front of me, and I'm not sure whether it's over or what it's saying to me. I think it's unhappy. I think it's unhappy. I'd spend too much time raving on. I just want to do one little drawing. If we in fact go through these different passages of life, if in fact we do, it's morning tea, so it doesn't matter if I just go on for half a minute longer. If I could, people do graphs of these sort of talks. I don't do graphs, I don't understand them, I don't understand these sort of presentations, but I'm going to make this little graph off the top of my head, an experiment of a life, your life, my life, an existence. And let us plot it as a line that wanders and meanders about. And if black might be a sign of strength and being definite, let me do that for a while. This is the course of a life, maybe. If you can't understand that, I don't know what's the matter with you. Anyway. It would wander about, a bit wobbly, like so. That would be a different time. That might be a time of excitement. And then there might be this time of, very oversimplified, but isn't that the nature of graphs? And this is a sort of maybe a time of stability and growth as and then it meanders, it backtracks a bit. And blue, I think it's terrible the way we've assigned blue to some sort of depression. It's the colour of the sky on a lovely fine day, so how can it be sad? Then it might go like this. You know, now we're at about the age of 15. And then we become definite again, and you can assign to these passages, these tracks of life, what you like. And so on it goes, and I think the colour doesn't sort of come through on the camera, but you know, because it's lovely where I'm standing. And so I think we're getting too close. I'm eating into your morning tea now. Not a happy situation. And so, you know, we're now in midlife or whatever, and, you know, on we would go down to some sort of high intensity, and maybe there's a small heart attack here, I don't know, just a little one, and so onwards we go, and until eventually, well, we come back to where we started, as you know. And maybe I would rather have a life like that than one which was just sort of all like that, you know. It was all the one colour and it was all just so. Or just worse even still, would be one like that. So with that thought in mind, I hope I haven't wasted your time, and whether this has made you happy, you will know probably in about an hour's time. So thank you very much.